Havens Rock is an island that writes its own laws. The things that happen here don't happen anywhere else. I'm Joe. I've been running the antique store in downtown Havens Rock for 30 years, and I've seen a lot. I'm Joe Clark, and this is the story of my encounter with true evil. It was a rainy and blustery day when the man who changed my life walked into my store. Because of the weather, there wasn't much else going on, so I was delighted to hear the bell that told me anyone had entered my store. When I looked up from my chair behind the counter, though, the joy vanished. The guy looked like a homeless person seeking shelter from the rain. His clothes were ripped all over, his greasy hair hung on his unshaven face, and he had open, bleeding wounds on his hands. I had to get rid of him quickly. I didn't care if it was raining outside. The bum was scaring away my potential customers. But I asked him if he was there to sell something. He seemed absent-minded, took a few seconds to pull himself together, and then he said, yeah, he would like to sell something. Well, I was curious. What kind of antiques could a bum from the street own? He pulled a gold cigarette case out of the inside pocket of his dirty jacket. The hairs on the back of my neck immediately stood up. This thing was made of gold. My trained eyes could see that immediately. But that wasn't the reason why the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I had the strangest feeling that I should stay away from this gold case. Like it was evil. The homeless man interrupted my thoughts, and to my surprise, he said he only wanted $50 for it to pay for a ticket on the ferry. He just wanted to get away from Havens Rock. $50 was a bargain. The thing was worth 10 times that. Despite my dark premonition about the nature of the case, I just had to go for it. The bum had probably stolen it and didn't know how much it was worth. I was happy to give him the $50 if he wanted to get off the island. I couldn't blame him. He already had opened the door, but stopped again and turned around to me. He said, "You're not a good person, I can tell. But I am, or I used to be. So I want to warn you, sell that thing as soon as possible. Whatever you do, don't keep it," he said. Then poof, he was gone. What strange advice. I wondered how he knew that I was planning to keep the case myself. I had spent my whole life on this stupid, strange island and never allowed myself anything nice. This cigarette case just looked so beautiful. It was golden and had a few characters engraved on it, but I didn't know them. The case made me feel like something better. After all, not everyone had a gold case like this. Yes, I would keep it. It rained and stormed for the rest of the day, so I didn't have much to do. I dusted off a few of the stone figurines that were often found around here, and then went home. No one would be coming by today in this weather. When I got home, I noticed that the power had gone out. One of the electric poles had probably been struck by lightning again. That happens a lot here on Havens Rock. The weather, the lightning, or the energy was a bit strange here. As I had nothing else to do, I read a book and eventually fell asleep in my chair. I only had one dream, and the next morning I could remember it as clearly as if it had been real. I was in a posh hotel. I think it was the North Star Hotel up in the mountains of Havens Rock. The place looked like a party. The music and the way people were dressed made me think we were in the 1920s. Fantastic. I entered the large ballroom and went over to the bar. There, I was greeted by a couple of people. The two men and the good-looking women introduced themselves to me as Michael Bennett, Robert Grayson, and Amelia LaPond. They admired me for my smart suit and especially for my nice cigarette case. I ordered a scotch from the bartender. When I wanted to pay, he refused and said that everything was on the house for a gentleman like me. Well, at last, I finally felt like I was somebody. I continued drinking expensive scotch, dancing with beautiful women, and talking animatedly with my new friends at the bar. Towards the end of the dream, I heard another voice. Now, I couldn't make out who it belonged to. It was almost if she was like whispering in my ear. "You can have it all, Joe. It's within your grasp," said the voice. Then I woke up and I was back in my little apartment in downtown Havens Rock. Today, I left early for work. I don't know, I felt so energized, and it was going to be worth it. First thing in the morning, I got a customer I'd never seen before. He said he was a collector of special paintings, and my paintings of a witch burning here on Havens Rock from 1665 was just the piece he was missing. He sounded really desperate. Now, I was in my element. Without him noticing, I removed the price tag that said $750 and told him I was sorry, but the painting had already been sold to another collector who would be coming by later today to pick it up. With this scam, I was able to drive the price up to $18,000. The idiot went home happy with the painting, and I was $18,000 richer. As far as I knew, the damn painting wasn't even worth the $750. Today had to be my lucky day. I was able to close a few more good deals, and I could have sworn that the pretty blonde who bought the old desk lamp was hitting on me. This has never happened to me before. Was it because of my new gold case? Maybe it was a psychological thing. The case gave me more self-confidence, and all the good things that had happened to me were the result of this increased self-confidence. I guess. Maybe it didn't matter. I just enjoyed my new life. At home, I was greeted by my parrot, Peanut. He finally said, "Hello, Joe. Hello, Joe." I'd been trying to teach him that for years. As I sat down in my armchair to watch my favorite show, Guess, Bet, and Win, I wondered if I should exercise more to reduce my paunch. With my new luck, maybe that would be done in no time at all. Like almost every evening, I fell asleep in my comfortable armchair. Again, I had a vivid dream. This time I wasn't in the beautiful North Star Hotel, but in an alley next to some bar. It was dark and raining. Right in front of me, a man was walking down the alley who looked familiar, and on closer inspection, I realized it was my new friend Robert Grayson from the dream before. I remembered how he had marveled at my gold case in the hotel. I wanted to tap him on the shoulder to greet him, but I couldn't. I had no arm. I didn't have an arm. I had no body at all. It was a strange experience. Grayson continued down the alley towards a young woman who looked like a prostitute. As he stood in front of her, she called him Cutie and asked if he had the change for a little fun. Robert said only one word, "Sorry." Then he plunged a knife into the pit of her stomach. The pain was so intense that the young woman couldn't even bring herself to holler for help. He stabbed the young woman's upper body and face with the knife again and again. It was horrible to watch, but I had no choice. When he finished his work, he took something out of his coat pocket. It was my gold cigarette case. He looked at it with a mixture of hope and relief. What was going on here? Then everything went black. Many scenes and images now floated past me. Robert moving into a small city villa, being delivered in an expensive foreign car. Then I saw him murdering his girlfriend. How I knew the woman was his girlfriend, I couldn't say, but I knew. And he continued to murder. Murdered an elderly lady, a gas station attendant, and even a boy who couldn't have been older than 16. Robert had become a beast. In the end, he was sitting in the dark alley where he had murdered the prostitute at the beginning. His smart suit had disappeared. He was wearing rags and his hair was greasy. He sat hopelessly on the floor, the wet, dirty floor, and looked at his gold case. I could feel what he was feeling. I don't want any more. I don't want to murder anymore. I don't want any more. I don't know what had happened to him, but he must have lost everything. Then he suddenly looked up. I could see the sheer horror in his eyes, the pure fear. Something was coming towards him. The true evil. I could see part of the pitch-black body covered in slime and eyes in a puddle. Then the thing swallowed Robert. I woke up. The panic and fear in Robert's eyes stayed with me all day. I kept looking around, but of course, I couldn't see the horrible monster anywhere. Was it just a dream? Or was there more to it? What was it about my golden case? Fortunately, I was distracted by the pretty blonde who came into my store for the second day in a row and this time bought an old circus poster. She smiled at me again. I resolved to speak to her tomorrow. By the time I sat in my armchair again in the evening and watched my programs, I had completely forgotten about the case and the terrible dream. I just felt good. At least until I fell asleep. This time, I found myself in a bathroom, and standing next to me was a pretty young woman wearing nothing but sexy lingerie, which made her look very seductive. Then I looked at her face and recognized my friend, Amelia Pond. She looked like she was about to make a difficult decision. Then she got moving and went into the bedroom. While she had been freshening up, her young lover man had handcuffed himself to the bed and was now happily waiting to see what Emily would do to him. The poor devil didn't know that Emily had never intended to sleep with him. After a moment's hesitation, she pulls out a letter opener, pulls it out of one of her suspenders, and thrusts it into the young man's genitals. He cried loudly, but fell silent when Amelia stabbed him several times in the lungs. Then she slumped to the floor and cried. Again, random images and scenes started to buzz around my head. Amelia in a loft with a hot tub. Amelia playing tennis, and Amelia murdering numerous people. In the end, she was sitting in a cheap hotel room. She looked emaciated and ill. There was a syringe in her arm, probably heroin. Her gaze, expressing absolute regret, was absent but focused on the golden cigarette case lying in front of her. In the window above her, I saw the terrible demon again. Somehow I knew that was exactly what he was. Not a monster, not a ghost, but a demon. This time I could see its huge mouth. It was full of sharp teeth. The most disgusting thing about it was that even the teeth had tiny eyes. They all stared at Amelia, who screamed in horror as she was eaten. Thank goodness, then I woke up. This time I was drenched in sweat. I was scared. I could no longer ignore the fact that these dreams were trying to tell me something. Something was bad wrong with my golden case. I didn't want to admit it because everything had been going so well for me since I had it. A pretty woman was making eyes at me. Things were looking up financially, and I just felt good. So I put the dark thoughts to one side and went to work. My first customer was the pretty blonde. I plucked all my courage and asked her if she wanted to have dinner with me tonight. To my amazement, she looked at me in disgust and then laughed at me. She called me a fatso and then left the store without buying anything. Had I been hallucinating? Hadn't she been smiling at me constantly over the last few days? I forgot about that stupid goat when the phone rang. It was John Palmer from the bank. He told me there was bad news. They couldn't cash the check I had recently deposited because it was counterfeit. The fraudster is known to the police, but they haven't been able to find him yet. So the $18,000? Well, they were history. What a bummer. I'd already spent a lot of it, and now my account was clearly in the red. Not a single customer came into my store for the rest of the day. So I left a half hour early after cleaning up a small puddle that I had discovered in a corner. Where it came from, however, it was a mystery to me. Another piece of bad news awaited me at home. My parrot Peanut didn't say, "Hello, Joe," today because he was no longer in his cage. Somehow he must have managed to open it and obviously escaped from the open window. Damn. Peanut meant everything to me. He was the only one I had left besides my mother. but she lived in a nursing home and was demented. Peanut was my only real friend, and now he was gone. What a run of bad luck. Instead of watching TV, I decided to do some research. First, I searched online for my gold cigarette case, but couldn't find anything. Then I typed in the names of my friends from the hotel and was amazed. Michael Bennett, Robert Grayson, and Amelia LaPont were all serial killers from Havens Rock. All three of them suddenly came into great wealth when their killing spree began. Shortly afterwards, however, they lost it all and disappeared without a trace. They were real. How could I have met them in a dream? I'd never heard of them before. Without hesitation, I simply threw the stupid case out the window. I never wanted to see it again. It took me until the middle of the night to fall asleep. Although I no longer had the case, the ghosts continued to haunt me. This time it was Michael Bennett I was watching murder. It was different with him than the others. He had a great desire to murder. He really enjoyed it. The murders became more brutal and his wealth increased. He stopped at no one. Old people, the homeless, people with disabilities. The more helpless his victims were, the more friends he seemed to have when he slaughtered them. Then he made a mistake and was caught by the police. I saw him in a solitary cell in Havens Rock Prison. Before he lost his wealth, he must have managed to smuggle his cigarette case into prison with him. He looked at it and kept shouting that he was sorry. He would like to go on, but he couldn't. Then the demonic figure appeared. It was about the same size as Bennett, but its demonic naked body was black as night and completely covered in slime and eyes. Maybe it was a strange fur, too. I couldn't tell for sure. Bennett was trembling now. Now he would experience for himself what it was like to be the victim. He screamed like a little bitch as the demon ate him and his dark soul. I waited to wake up, but I waited in vain. Instead, the demon turned to me and spoke to me. "You're not a good person. You are like Bennett. Start practicing his craft and you will be rewarded," said the demon. "No, I'm not murdering for you," I shouted. "Not for me, for our king." Then I woke up. The raindrops were pattering so hard against my windows that I didn't know how I could even sleep with all that noise. I'd hoped Peanut was okay and had found shelter from this crap weather. Another morning, and on the way to work I went. I thought about the demon's words. I wasn't a good person, he had said. Was I really like Bennett? Didn't I care about other people? I decided to change, because I didn't want to be like Bennett. I would start tomorrow and visit my mother in the old people's home. I also resolved to be nicer to my customers and stop ripping them off. However, I had to wait with this plan because I wouldn't have any customers for quite a while. My store had serious water damage. Apparently, the flat roof was leaking, which had also caused a small puddle in the store yesterday. Now, part of the roof had collapsed under the masses of rain and had not only flooded my store, but also a lot of my goods. I was ruined. How was I going to replace all this? When I tried to get my cell phone out of my inside pocket of my jacket, I almost had a heart attack. I felt something next to my phone. It was the gold cigarette case. It just wouldn't let go of me. The homeless man had sold it to me, so maybe that was the key. I walked from store to store all day and even spoke to people on the street, but no one wanted to buy the gold case from me, not even for just $50. Unlike me, they probably listened to their gut feeling that told them to stay away from that item. Over the next few weeks, I lost my business, my apartment, and my hair. I ended up on the street, which is where the last owner of the cursed thing ended up. Every night, the demon warned me that I would lose more if I didn't kill. But I ignored it. I knew where this path would lead if I played his games. If I had known what he was going to take from me, I might have acted differently. One night I had another dream in which I was following someone as a disembodied observer. And this time it wasn't Bennett or any of the others. It was the demon I was following. He was walking through the entrance of a hall of some building. Now, somehow the building looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. The demon wandered through the corridors. He seemed to be looking for a particular room. Were we in a hotel? Then he stopped in front of a door. No, it wasn't a hotel. The demon opened the door and looked at my sleeping mother. My sleeping mother. He was in her old people's home. I begged him not to do it, but my pleas were in vain. Before he devoured her with his terrible mouth, he woke her up. I wanted to see the true evil and feel the sheer fear that the others had felt before her. I had to watch it all and was destroyed inside. I woke up in my car and just felt empty. Now, he really had taken everything from me. I'm sorry, Mother. Like the last few days, I parked in front of the small hotel in downtown Havens Rock to get some free Wi-Fi there. I kept looking for ways to get rid of the case and maybe even undo it all, and suddenly I got a message on eBay Classifieds. I'd already forgotten that I put that stupid thing up for sale there too. Someone had responded to my ad. He said he'd give me the $50 for the case. I just had to come to the address given. I immediately jumped out of the car and ran off. Gas was expensive, so I preferred to walk. It wasn't far anyway. I got to the agreed address and realized that they were old acquaintances of mine. I was standing in front of Grunge Child Laboratories, the laboratory of the company that had already bought a few supposedly cursed paintings and other stuff from me. When I rang the bell, I was invited in by a voice. A person in a full bodysuit greeted me and led me to a room with a machine in it. The room was made of glass, so you had a good view of what was going on inside from the outside. The next room was made of glass too, but it was empty. Well, almost empty. There was only one large mirror in it. Out of the blue, the machine started talking. "Hello, Joe. I'd like to buy your cigarette case. Here's $50, said the machine, which looked like an overhead projector with a gripper arm. Then it handed $50 over to me with that very same gripper arm. I was a little confused, but accepted the $50 and gave him his new case in return. Now it was no longer my problem, but the lab's. Havens Rock had taken everything from me. I lost my apartment, my antique store, my beloved parrot, and even my mother. But I want to get it all back. My name is Joe Clark, and this is the story of the 11-mile ritual. For a long time, I thought about the run of bad luck that had made me homeless. Actually, I wasn't completely homeless. I could at least sleep in my car. Nevertheless, my life was ruined. I wondered if it was because I wasn't a good person. I regularly ripped off my customers, threw homeless people out of my store who were trying to get shelter from the rain, and hardly ever visited my mother in the retirement home. Was all of this the receipt for all of that? I don't know. I couldn't accept that. It just didn't seem right. I wanted a second chance, and I would get one. After what had happened to me, I realized that supernatural phenomena and legends could be true. At least here on Havens Rock. There's a lot of dark energy here, and I think there's been something going on lately. Waking up, I rummaged through the remains of my once expensive antiques for quite some time and finally found what I was looking for. A way to make everything good again. It was a set of instructions for a ritual that someone had scratched into the lid of an old music box. It was called the 11-mile ritual. You ran the risk of losing your life, but you could fulfill your heart's desire if everything worked. It was actually quite simple. You had to drive your car to Folk Forest in Havens Rock and take the road that leads through the forest. As you drive along the road, you had to concentrate hard on the ritual and your heart's desire. Then you would discover a turnoff to a road you'd never seen before. You then had to travel 11 miles on this road and follow a few rules. Well, this all sounded doable. And with a bit of luck, I would finally be able to see my mother again. At the pawn shop, I pawned my last sack for $40, so I had money for gas. I was also lucky that the battery hadn't died yet, and as long as my car had been sitting around. Around 12 o'clock at night, I drove over to Folk Forest and stopped in front of it. Now, I really had nothing left except my car, the music box with the instructions, and the clothes I was wearing. That was it. I had moved my smartphone a few days ago after recording and posting a video of what happened to me, just in case this went wrong. The world needed to know that everything was different in Havens Rock. Then I drove off into the forest. I found it hard to pay attention to the dark road while concentrating on the ritual and my mother. After a few minutes, I managed a little better. Without losing my concentration on the road, I imagined my mother's face. I imagined my mother in my mind's eye, but as she was with dementia and had destroyed her thinking and her memories, I imagined her before. It was nice. Shortly afterwards, I felt a kind of vibration in my stomach. Then I realized why. 100 meters further on, I saw a fork in the road that wasn't supposed to exist. The road normally led into the forest, straight through it and out again. There were no junctions, no intersections, so I had done it right. Now I was off. Mile 1. The rules for Mile 1 were simple. Turn on the heating. That was all there was to it. No problem. Then I realized why you should turn on the heat. It was getting cold. Very cold. Weirdly, unnaturally cold. I could see my own breath even though the heating was on. I got goosebumps and the hairs on my arms stood up. My body knew that it was no longer in the reality I knew. Mile 2. The rule for the second mile was ignore the shadows. I had no idea what that meant. It was pitch black outside. There were no shadows to be seen. Although, if you looked closer, something was moving between the trees. It could only be seen briefly, but it was there. Whether you would call it a shadow, I don't know. It was pure darkness moving there. Then it darted across the road right in front of me. It took all my concentration not to brake and ignore the shadow and just keep driving. What had that been? Mile 3. Hello, Joe. Hello, Joe. That rule for Mile 3 was ignore the voices. So I did. The voice I heard was that of my parrot Peanut. During my losing streak, he flew away from an open window. He was my only real friend, and I missed him. Hearing his voice again brought tears to my eyes, and it was just sadistic. I didn't think it could get any worse, but it obviously could. Are you playing a game with me, Joe? Please, Joe, why don't you play with me, Joe? That was my mother. At least it was her voice. On the few occasions when I visited her in the retirement home, she was eager to play with me. Uno, Mau Mau, or Romy. But I refused every time, even though it would have meant a lot for her. I just couldn't do it. During these games, it simply became clear that she wasn't her old self. She forgot when it was her turn. She forgot the rules, and sometimes she just stared into space. I couldn't watch it. It hurt me too much. That was the reason why I didn't play with her and visited her so little. I was too weak. I couldn't watch her suffer. This ritual seemed to want to rub my nose in all my mistakes again. But I imagined to ignore the voices and drove on. Mile 4. The rule for Mile 4 was ignore the surroundings. I didn't have to puzzle over what that meant for long. The trees had suddenly disappeared and I was riding through barren terrain. No buildings, no signs, no junctions, no forest that had been there a second ago. Not only had everything disappeared here on the ground, but also up in the sky. No clouds, no stars, no moon, just darkness. No matter, I kept going. It didn't matter where I was. Mile 5. The rule for Mile 5 was ignore the radio, don't turn it off. My radio was already off, so I couldn't turn it off. Or so I thought, because suddenly I heard a radio broadcast even though I hadn't touched any of the buttons. Welcome to another edition of Haven's Rock News this evening. I'm Bryce Mitchell, your old and favorite radio host. I had never heard of this show. We received an email from the couple Richard and Anne-Marie Gooseman. They asked us to look for the owner of a parrot. The parrot had suddenly appeared on their balcony and looked as if he had been flapping around in the wild for a few weeks. What? Could that be? Peanut? Was that possible? Or was this just the sadistic streak of the 11-mile ritual again? The Goosemans would like to compensate the owner. They ripped all the feathers out of the animal and roasted it alive. They say it tasted wonderful with rosemary potatoes from the oven. How nice of them to be so honest and offer the owner of the roast chicken monetary compensation. The Goosemans? The Goosemans? This wasn't real. This wasn't real. Peanut would be fine. I kept thinking. None of this was real. I wiped the tears from my face and drove on. Mile 6. The rule for mile 6 was ignore the lights. At first I thought it was the lights in the car because they suddenly started to flicker. But then I saw small lights next to the road. The forest had reappeared, and every now and then I saw 2 small red lights between the trees. On closer inspection, the lights, which always appeared in pairs, were eyes. I started to sweat terribly despite the cold. Eyes. But I kept going. Mile 7. I already knew the rule for mile 7. Ignore the voices. This time, voices was written in capital letters. After a few seconds on the 7th mile, I knew why. You've been a bad son. Come on, let's play a game of Uno in hell because that's where I am now because of you. It was my mother's voice. But this time, voices was written in capital letters. After a few seconds on the 7th mile, I knew why. You've been a bad son. Come on, let's play a game of Uno in hell because that's where I am now because of you. It was my mother's voice again, but this time it was so close that it sounded like she was whispering in my ear. I could even feel her breath on the back of my neck, even though there was no one sitting behind me. Why did you kill me, Joe? As per the rule, I didn't answer and drove on. Mile 8. Keeping to this rule cost me a lot of nerves. It was, close your eyes. And that's what I did. I drove a little slower, but a bend would have taken me off the road immediately, and I could have driven head-on into a tree. Every now and then I steered to the right or the left, not knowing whether this would kill me, but I actually seemed to stay on the road. Good. Now it was getting serious. Mile 9. The rule for the 9th mile scared me a little. It read, don't look in the rearview mirror and don't look behind. When you read that, you automatically feel the need to look behind. Was someone sitting there? Perhaps the owner of the red eyes from earlier. Or the demon from the cigarette case that had brought me so much bad luck. I was torn from my thoughts when a hand grabbed my shoulder from behind. Of course I was startled, although it wasn't a firm grip like an attack, but more of a loving touch. Then the hand began to stroke my neck. I could feel how cold and squishy the fingers felt, like those of a rotting corpse. Somehow I knew it was my mother's hand, my mother who had been torn from the grave to torture me mentally. But if I wanted her back, if I wanted to finally see her again, then I had to persevere and not look in the rearview mirror or backwards. My whole body was shaking. But I managed. Mile 10. When I got to the 10th mile, the touches stopped. The rule for this mile didn't scare me either. It was simply, don't stop. That should be doable. After that, there was only the 11th mile, where the only task was to close your eyes again. Then you would find yourself back at the starting point and your heart's desire would be fulfilled. The reunion with my mother was within reach. Then I saw something standing on the side of the road. It was a pretty blonde. She was only wearing a miniskirt and had a very revealing see-through bra. She stuck out her thumb and was obviously looking for a lift. I drove slower. The woman I dared to approach was disgusted by me and wouldn't even think of going out with me. But this one was different. She made a gesture with her lips that almost made me stop, but only almost. I knew she wasn't real, and even if she was, I wouldn't stop. But this was about more than that. It was about making amends. I was proud of myself as I simply passed her by. Mile 10 was almost done. Soon I would be able to see my mom again. And I did, even faster than I thought. She just appeared in front of my car. She was only wearing her nightgown and looked confused. There was nothing I could do. I braked immediately but hit her with the car. The rumble I heard as she rolled over my hood and then over my roof was awful. Was this all for nothing? Was it just a cruel game? The ritual gave me my mother back just so I could murder her again? Immediately, I got out of the car and wished I had my cell phone at hand so I could call 911. Then I stopped. My mother was nowhere to be seen. The surroundings were also completely different. I was standing in front of the folk forest in Havens Rock again. My car was still where it had been before, but I was in the middle of the ritual. I was about to complete the 10. Oh no, I'd got out of the car. All around me, I saw the red eyes that I'd already seen during the ritual. The eyes, they came closer and closer. You have broken the rules. The price is your soul. Now they own my soul, and I work for them. Now that I know what malevolence truly lurks beneath Haven's skirt, I exist in pure fear. If you've listened to this, never come to my island. Evil lives here. Hey, horror fans, want to learn more about the strange island, Havens Rock? Then click here on the next video and subscribe.